like you guys are solid on, or um,
We won't be, but thank you for saying we might.
just has a minimum. Oh, but if you guys have like need to know about other stuff, like you can ask anything. I'll answer it. So now that everyone's here, I'm gonna go over what we're gonna go over today. You just leave it on mute.
Well, I can change it.
Do we need to take this off? That's okay.
Also, if anybody cares, we are recording.
Oh, that's fine.
Are you saying I'm ugly?
What? No, I just meant to. I don't know. I'm just showing it to Rochelle. Oh God, the lag.
So we're getting feedback from
Turn it off.
Oh, so I can hear
Oh,
yours.
yeah, got it. Okay.
Is it from mine?
no, it was from Elizabeth and May.
Oh, okay.
Fixed. It's fine.
We got it.
Yeah. Okay. So here's what we're going to go over today. One, we're going to go over the purpose of a light plot. So this will kind of look at like why we're doing any of this, like what, like who this goes to, why this matters, kind of giving purpose to this whole point, this whole lesson. We're going to look at the elements of a light plot. So we're going to look at like the different things that you put together to add it all up. Bree talked about how there was some confusion on like different types of lights, like a spot versus a wash, or the purpose of front light versus top light. So we'll do an overview of that. And then I'll tell you guys essentially for this project, like, because all of you should have this template in your drawer in the D-Lab. And this is the template that you'll use to trace out these things, considering the first time we're doing this is on paper. So I'll break it down to like 4 different lights you have to worry about on this thing for this project. So you don't have to look at the 20, 30 options here and get overwhelmed, because they all do something similar. So it makes sense that that'd be kind of overwhelming if it's your first time having to do that. And then going over all that, after all that, we'll actually look at creating this thing. Then we'll be looking at what your floor plan needs for a lighting plot, because you need a floor plan to know, kind of give context to it. What needs to go on the battens, so where the lights hang. And then we'll walk through plotting the front light. We'll walk through plotting the electrics on the stage. And we'll walk through how to put in the different information of each light, so like its address and stuff and why that matters. And then we'll walk through making an instrument key in Legend. And then to finish all of this, we'll review what the instrument schedule is, which is that sheet that's going to complement the light itself. So it's like the more nitty-gritty details in a more of like a Excel sheet format. And that's what I have prepared for today. I'm not a teacher, so bear with me here. I'm gonna get rid of all this mess. It's just, I wanted to be artsy.
And can I make one recommendation?
Yeah, sure.
I think with the video, it has us showing whatever box is the voice is coming through. Can we make that Bree's device instead of yours?
You can change it to gallery view as well.
Oh.
And what you can do is if it's speaker view and you double click on a speaker. Like
I'm just thinking about for the recording.
Yeah, I mean, for the recording, you could just double click on Bree's view in speaker view, and that will full screen it.
Okay, cool.
No matter what, it'll like prioritize it. All right, so you guys ready to begin?
Hell yeah.
All right, so the purpose of a light plot. Straight. So the whole reason we make this in its complementary documents is to communicate with the master electrician where fixtures go, roughly how they're focused, the color that's put inside of them, if they have a gobo, its circuit address channel information, and then also its purpose in the show, which usually correlates with its focus information. So all that's supposed to be communicated to your master electrician, and then it's their job to translate that and communicate to whoever's below them how to install that in the actual venue. So this really only goes to your master electrician and your TD, like stage manager and director might look at it for context. But for the most part, that's the only person who really needs to interact with this is you and your master elect. So then I mentioned there's complementary documents. A document is known as a plate when it comes to drafting, like a dinner plate. And all of it, it's like interchangeable. It's just essentially, it's a, how do I say this? It's a relic of like an older time that still holds true now about what it's called. So these documents include the light plot itself, an instrument schedule, and then it can include some other things, but those are the main two. So it could include a patch schedule, which is a little different, a data diagram, and another one which we're going to look at today, which is a focus plate, which I have an example of, which might help you when you're creating your light plot. So before we get into any further, I wanted to give you guys some examples of 3 different light plots that all do the same thing, but they do them very differently. And the whole point of that is the fact that we're going to talk about some rules that you have to follow, but in reality, whatever rules you set for your light plot, as long as you stay true to them, so if you set a standard about how you're going to do something and you stay consistent throughout, that's what really matters. So I'm going to show you how 3 different designers accomplish the same thing, making a light plot, in 3 completely different ways. So I'm going to, May, could you give me the ability to share my screen?
Yep.
And so if you're locked on the light plot view, you'll want to switch over to my view. And I'll just do a full screen here. All right. Are you guys able to see that?
Yep.
Just excellent. How do I move this? Okay. So we're going to start with, this is the rep plot of the Weber Center in La Crosse. So this plot includes a lot of architectural information. So you can see where the doors are, the stairs, where seats would be. You can see stairwells. There's a lot of stuff going on here, right? But if we look down here, we get a lot closer, you can see the fixture information. So you can see it has the shape of a light, what lens it has, its color. In the back here, it includes its channel and circuit information, which we'll go into more detail about what that means in a little bit. It includes a center line. It probably includes some kind of plaster line, the proscenium. So this symbol right here is a center line. It looks like it includes a ruler on the page as a reference point. A lot of things, right? So it communicates where these lights go and what direction they roughly go on each batten. Down here, it includes an instrument schedule that explains what each symbol means and what they are, so you can refer to that and be like, oh, this is a source 419 degree. And it also includes an instrument legend over here where my mouse is, saying this is what is typical for each of these data values. So like the color goes on top of the instrument, the degree, which is the angle, the size of like the bigger degree means like a bigger cone of light coming out of the instrument through the lens, where it's focused, if it has a gobo, and then the symbols underneath it, it clarifies as its dimmer and channel. And that shows that that's pretty much the layout for all fixture types, no matter what you're looking at. I didn't realize that they had Platinum Spot 15R Pros. I don't really know what's up with these details over here, but pretty much that gives you the info you need as a lighting designer to understand what's going to be available in this venue. So then if we look over to here, this is a show I did a couple weeks ago, and this took place on a stage outside. And although there's some differences, it still includes the information of where the lights go on the truss. There is an instrument legend, or in this case, I labeled it typical, down here saying how this is laid out. So it's universe, address, and fixture ID. And it includes a instrument key, or in this case, it's called a symbol key. That's just what I called it. But this is all the same info, doing it in slightly different ways. And fortunately, I'm the one who installed it, so I didn't really have to explain it to anyone. And both of them feature a title block that includes similar information, like the scale, the venue, what's going on with the show. I like to leave pictures of the client, because for some reason, if you put a picture of a client or their brand, they just love it. They're like sheep. And then this last one does the same thing that these other ones do, or does very similar things, but it does it in a very different way. So this plot is for Billy Currington's festival rig for last summer. I think it still might be the same rig that they use, since they didn't want to pay for a new one during COVID. So in this case, it shows where all the lights go in a 3D space, and it color codes which each light is. And if you keep going down, it shows it in a couple different views. So this is like that same top-down bird's eye view. There's a side elevation. If you go further, it gives more details about what's going on here. If you look here, this is a bit more familiar. It includes the symbol, and then there's a standard way that they are going through and labeling all the information here. So although they might have a different format, they selected a set of rules to follow, and then they followed that throughout the entire process. So like these lights are the same color as the 3D view, and every light is labeling its channel and address and such using the same format, which is what's really important. And then this is rigging stuff, which we won't get into. Fun fact, this setup is actually, its rigging is done wrong. We found out it isn't to spec, and we had to change it because I guess 4Well's telling us, I don't know. So all that's supposed to show is the fact that all of these lighting plots, although they look different, they all communicate similar things in similar ways, but they're consistent within their own right. Like if you look here, this one has an instrument key, except it's just looks a little bit different, although it does the same thing. Okay, I'm gonna back out of those. Does that first point make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Excellent. So, are there any questions so far?
No.
Excellent.
I do have one. What does typical mean?
Oh, sure. So, in a lot of different sets or lighting plots, or really any type of drafting, it's very common that you'll have things that repeat itself. So if you have one like it's mostly used in sets, but it's also used in lighting when it comes to something like an instrument legend. So in a set, if you have like a window that's built a certain way, and you have the same thing on the other side of that wall, you might box off that window and label it typical and just say, put it there, so you don't have to refill in all that info twice. So typicals, if you're repeating something, it's an easy way to get around having to actually repeat it in your draft, which keeps everything a lot cleaner.
So for like a light plot, if you plot all the lights and then your legend, you say this is typical, like how you label it?
Yep.
Okay.
So typical in lighting is usually used in concerns of the formatting, not the specific information. So like I used it to show the typical way I'm gonna show the address, channel, and fixture ID in that plot. Does that help?
Yes.
Awesome. So now let's talk about the elements of a light plot. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment, and we're not quite to using the light plot here yet, but I'll use it as an example. So the first thing you need is a ground plan. So you might ask yourself, how detailed does this ground plan need to be? Well, the simple answer is, and can you guys hear me if I'm facing this way?
Yeah.
Awesome. The simple answer is the ground plan needs to be as detailed as it affects like lighting elements. So you don't need to know all the little set dressings and the fact that this desk might be 2'6" versus 2'8". All you care about is the fact that there's furniture there that someone's going to be sitting at a lot. So in this case, what we know here is there is a proscenium, and if you guys can't tell, I'm looking at the plot right now. There's a proscenium here, and this is our theater, if that wasn't obvious. There's also a set of walls in the back, and there is a wall here, although I didn't print this out correctly, and I messed something up, but there is a wall here. And there's a window, and then there's two doors, and it shows which way they swing. And then you can also see there's a layout of where the acting space is for the most part, and that might be complemented by paint on the floor or something like that. I'm just looking at the notification respawn. And then the other thing that this includes that's really important, it also includes all of our curtains. So all of our soft goods are mentioned here. And what's important about that is, as a lighting designer, although you care about making sure things are illuminated, you also really care that some things aren't illuminated. So you really need to know where these lines of sight get cut off in order to accurately to position your lights, so you know how many you need, or maybe you don't need something there, or maybe that sparks a conversation with your, well, I guess if you're the designer, you know, maybe your TD about what's available in the venue and what you're able to do. So walls, doors, windows, the acting space is really important, and it's assumed that it's going to be everything that is reasonable. And then soft goods, and then architecture, probably the most important things. I included some furniture here that were relevant to the scene, but I didn't include anything extra, and you try to keep the amount of like letters and numbers and muck that can add up to a minimum, because you want to, this document's not about the set, it's about the lights. So does that make sense about the ground plan?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
You were there when you were asking Peggy about this. She was talking about labeling the furniture when you were working on your floor plan. Was she having you do that on your light plot too, or just your floor plan? Okay. Cool. Sorry.
No, that's a great question, because if you don't label anything, then you're going to end up with a lot of really confusing squares and rectangles and such, right? So what I would say is, you don't want the document to be terribly filled and busy with all of these little labels and set pieces. So label it as much as it's relevant. And also you can label it a lot smaller, like let's say it's a bed. You can use a lot smaller font text on the light plot compared to the floor plan, to make it so that information's expressed, but it's not overwhelming and taking over your like lighting symbols and stuff. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Awesome. So now we're going to move on to battens and electrics for what the elements of this light plot. So a batten is technically the pipes that are flown above the stage. And usually, so like a catwalk technically wouldn't be a batten, but in this case, we're just going to use batten as an overall term for everything that a light is hung on. So in this case, I have the proscenium pipe, 3 electrics, and then I have the front of house catwalk and the back of house catwalk to hang with. I got rid of all the extra stuff on this plot because I didn't want it to be confusing for a lesson, you know? And there's no reason you need to do any crazy side light and stuff for your first light plot project, you know? Something I find helpful is if you have something like a circuit diagram to mark out. So there's these little hash marks here.
What's a circuit diagram?
Excellent question. Let me share my screen. So we'll go into a little more detail about this, but essentially a circuit is the thing you plug into on stage, and a circuit diagram is essentially a top plan, so like a bird's eye view of the stage, and the only info it really cares for is very basic geometry of the stage, and then it just labels where all the different circuits on the stage are. So in this case, these are the battens, these are floor pockets, stuff like that. Does that make sense?
Cool, thanks.
And I sent like 20 minutes ago, Bree, an email to forward to you guys that includes this document, so you can refer to it when you're making your plots. But it's pretty helpful if you make little marks about where these circuits are on the battens and electrics that you're actually using. So at least like the catwalks, it just makes your life a little bit easier for some reference points. Other elements. So you have the actual light fixtures. So the fixtures themselves. And then I don't think there's too much to get in there, but you'll be using this stencil, and you should be able to find the either exact instrument or a very similar instrument to what you're using. And what you'll do is you'll trace that out, and depending on what you're using, you will connect that in your instrument schedule, which we'll go over near the end of this. Light info, so your lights will all have to have some kind of information connected to them, which is what these symbols are under them, to tell the electrician things like what circuit to plug it in, what channel it is, possibly where it's focused. And then there's also a key and a legend. So, I put them on the same thing. So an instrument key includes all the instruments, while an instrument legend is just an example of what about how you're labeling each instrument. So it's that typical thing mentioned earlier. All right, do those elements make sense?
Yeah, just for clarification, you're referring to circuit the same way that you would refer to addresses, right?
That is an excellent question, and I think I have it. I will go into detail about that later in this, but for the moment, we'll consider circuit and address the same thing.
Cool.
All right, so those are the different elements that we'll be dealing with on our light plot. Bree mentioned that it might be helpful to have some context on the different types of lights, both in a broader sense and then also specifically about what we're supposed to be dealing with here. So I prepared, if you go back to my screen, which I'm now sharing, some notes about these lights. So there's 2 main types of lights that you'll deal with, spot light and a wash light. There's other types, but for this project, those are your 2 primary ones you'll deal with. So a spotlight is also known as an ellipsidal, an ERS profile, or a LECO, which is more of a slang term. It feels weird using the word slang, but this is like most of the instruments in the theater. If you ever hung something with Peggy, this is probably the type of light it was. If it has shutters, if it creates a hard edge, that's what's special about a spotlight, is the fact that it can create a defined edge. If there's a lens in the front you have to mess with, that is what's known as a spotlight. And then there's a wash light, and some examples of that would be a par or a par can, depending on how cheap you are, and a Fresnel, which do slightly different things, but the defining characteristic about them is that they I don't know what's going on in this scene, but kind of freaky. But it has a soft edge no matter what, and it cannot create a hard edge. So those are the two different like main fixture types. And then if we look at it in a different sense, if you look at it based on where you position the light, there's three main positions for light that you'll be dealing with. There's front light, which the main purpose of front light is to illuminate the subject. And this is usually where you'll start making your plot, as you cover your front light, because no matter what, you're going to have to be able to see them. And you would use something like a spotlight for front light, because they are the most configurable type of light. So a spotlight, or in our inventory, a Shakespeare, is something that you'll use on your plot for front light. There's top light, also known as shin or shoulder light. And the purpose of top light is to, one, it's usually used as a wash light, because it's you can make an even wash across the stage of color. And then it's also used to light up your subject from the top, so then they are separated from your set, or else sometimes they kind of blend in. So if you notice here, his shoulders and head are the most illuminated. That difference in illumination creates what's known as a halo effect, where light will shine off your hair and stuff. And that's what really defines your shape from the set. Then are there any questions about what I've gone through with those light types?
Yeah, so
It's too quick.
when you're making an area on stage, you're mostly using front lights. Is that what you're doing when you make your like different acting areas?
Kinda, yes. So usually what will happen, and I have a section in here about that, so that's an awesome question, is you'll define the acting areas, or in the lighting designer's case, a focus area, because you care about where the lights are being focused. And then you will set up front light for that area, and then you'll usually also set up a top light as a wash light to fill in that area as well. So then you can bring in the front and wash of area A or area 1. So usually what will happen is you'll define those areas, and then you'll have front and top light to complement every single area that you want to interact with. And then if you turn them all on, you will get an overall wash of the area, of the stage. Any other questions about spotlights, wash, front, side light, anything? All right, I'll just keep on keeping on here. Feel free to interrupt and cut me off. The third type of light is side light. And the purpose of side light is to define the form of the subject. So it's not about illuminating their face, although you can see here there's a bit of illumination going on. It's not terribly concerned with separating them from the background or creating a smooth wash across the stage. All it's worried about is accentuating the shape of the character. So this is really common in like dramatic, unrealistic type plays or in dance. And you can have side light come from like really high up at extreme angles, but usually you'll put them low to the ground so it can get a really extreme angle. So you might even put them directly on the ground so they come from like straight on instead of coming from anywhere in the air. And so if you have a play that is a little more mystical, or it's not set in like a real world. You're not trying to recreate real life. Side light can be a really good way to be really dramatic. I'm sure it was used a ton in something like Little Shop.
What is a good instrument to use for side light?
You know, it really depends, but I'll let you know that your professor really likes to use spotlights. So if you're making this for a project, I might lean towards that because she'll be biased. But it kind of depends on the situation. So if you wanted side light in a really specific area of the stage and it couldn't overlap anywhere, you'd use a spotlight. But if you just want side light to blow up as much as the area as possible, you'd probably use some kind of wash light because they typically have a wider beam, although it's hard to control it. Does that help?
Yep.
Yep.
Awesome. And if any of you decide to do booms, which are like, which is what happens when you set up like a pipe on the ground and hang it from there instead of from something in the air. Yeah, like in Dandscape. Feel free to reach out if you're doing that, if you want help on how to like specifically accomplish that. I didn't include it in this because most shows, especially for your first plot, won't feature that. So this is all fine and dandy, great context, but we need to get this project done in the next week, so we should probably limit ourselves to a couple lights that we know what they do in order to not get overwhelmed by what's available. So the lights that matter to you for this project. This one is a spotlight that is known as a Altman Shakespeare. They just took his name. It was insane. And if you look on the white plot view, that is the one my finger's under. I flip it, make it the right way. It says shakes. Oh. It says shakes. So it's this one. It's kind of long because in real life the thing is stupidly long. That is a spotlight, so an ellipsidal or profile, all the same thing. And it's the one we have the most of in our inventory. So I don't know if she's trying to bound you to our inventory.
In the rubric, she has on there what all we can use.
Oh, interesting. I haven't looked at a rubric, so I just picked the former like.
No, that's fair.
The second one that matters to you is it's known as a source for par, which on here is this one right here that says S4 par, and it kind of looks like a triangle, maybe a cone. This is a form of a wash light, and we specifically have one that's called a color source par that's LED and can change colors and stuff. So if you wanted to do that, that's cool too. It's the same symbol. You just would label a little different, probably based on what she has in that rubric. But this is an example of a wash light. Fresnel, that right here is this one, which is labeled 8-inch FR, which 8 inches the lens size.
Will you say that one more time? I didn't hear you.
Yeah, it's a Fresnel, although it's spelled weird, it's French. And then on the template that everyone should have in their drawers, it's the one I used back in the day. It says 8-inch FR. So it's just shorthand. And this is another form of a wash light. The only real difference between a Fresnel and a par, like in use, is the fact that you can make the Fresnel flood out really big and cover a lot of area, or you can make it really small and cover a small amount of area, while the par is a fixed amount of space that it will take up.
What about the dispersions that you can put on pars?
That's a great question. So we do have some different filters that you're able to put on the pars, and the way you would label that is whether it's narrow, which is I think it's you would label it NSP, where you would put your gel color on the plot, which we'll get into. Or you would label it WFL for wide or MFL for medium, based on the size you wanted to use. And you would put that in place of a gel on your plot. And then the last type of light you're going to want to use, or you may use, is a strip light. I have that on this plot up here as an example. If you have the cyc out, you're probably going to want some way to light it. And strip light is how you're going to accomplish that. The thing about strip lights is they're technically 4 different lights just all in one big body. So there's like 4 different plugs that you have to plug in, and you can control independently, which makes it a little tricky when it comes to drafting it. But if anybody has questions on how to do that for their piece, for this one, I just closed the curtain and I said no cyc, and now you don't have to do it.
What would like a psych be?
If you have a show with like a sunset, or you want to set like the outdoor space, it's also really commonly used in shows that aren't taking place in real life. So like Midsummer's Night Dream, right? Anything where you want to add just a ton of color.
Okay.
It's really common. Where it wouldn't be used as commonly is something like a play that takes place indoors and the weather outside isn't very relevant to the show. So do those 4 lights make sense?
Yeah.
So you don't have to stick to these, but if I were you, I would just start here and see how that works. And if you want to expand past that, that's awesome, but you got to kind of have like a base in order to get in. So we've gone over that. We've gone over what you need in a floor plan and the battens, which I was going to do later, but I already did. So now we can actually walk through plotting a few of these things. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I don't think I have anything for that. And click here. Move on to our light plot. So most of your lights will relate to a focus area that you define ahead of time. So like you're going to point this light to focus area J, A, B, C, whatever it might be. So it's really helpful is to create a page where you have this as a visual reference. And usually if I'm making a plot, I'll set up this like focus diagram or whatever you want to call it. I don't really have a name for it, I guess, on a separate piece of paper because I think it just gets way too busy looking. Like there's just a lot going on there in addition to the plot. But what this does is it makes it so if you want to point this light at focus area H, well then you know to point it there. Or if you're like laying out all your lights and you need to like do, like I usually do math, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna need 5 lights to cover the apron. So I know I need to put 5 lights down somewhere to cover that. And that will make it also really easy when you're notating this stuff after the fact, be able to refer to that. So I already set up some lights here, but I'm going to erase a few of them so we can do it together. So if I want to illuminate some front light because front light would come from something like the back of house. What type of fixture would I use to create front light?
Front light? Shakespeare?
Shakespeare.
Yep. So a Shakespeare would probably be your go-to light. So if we look at our template, that's the one labeled shapes. And I forget how I had this. Ding, 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 ding.
Front lighting is mainly for like actors and face, like this one.
Yep. The main purpose of front light is illumination. So It's just about filling area for the most part. So I'm going to locate where the Shakespeare is, and I'm going to find a place on my template, on my plot, to put it down. And let's say I want to fill focus area C with this. So there's a few ways you can do this when it comes to placing it. So the first one way you can do it is you can line up your light to just be like straight 90 degrees no matter what. So it doesn't matter where it's pointing. And you'll just trace this. So then that's straight, and then you'll notate that it's going to be focused at C. The other option is you could figure out where C is from your fixture and then put down your light and make it so in addition to being notated, it's also physically pointing at that subject already. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I have a question. So
Yeah.
she was doing all this weird stuff she was trying to explain like the angles, so like the degrees of the thing pointing from this angle to hit this. She still has a diagram on the board of it, and it makes absolutely no sense. I can show you what she wrote on the board, but like.
Oh, she's saying, how do you pick what size lens, so like what degree, based on where you are from your subject?
Yeah, I think so.
So what she's referring to is something called photometrics. And I mean, I'm not a professor, but I don't think that should be anywhere near a first lighting plot. Like, you shouldn't be worried about that. A rule of thumb when you guys are doing this, to make this a lot easier. So there are 20 degree and 30 degree Shakespeares. So the 20 degree Shakespeares shoot a smaller size beam of light compared to the 30 degrees, which are 10 degrees bigger, right? So the way I think of it is if I'm on the back of the house, I'm going to be using this to illuminate the apron and then the first kind of section of area past the proscenium, okay? For the apron ones, use the 30 degrees, okay?
Okay.
For the second row of focus areas, which will be right around this proscenium, for this section, use the 20 degrees. The reason why is because if you use a smaller degree and it moves a further distance, it will have to make, it will be larger once it gets to the stage, right? So as a rule of thumb for this project, just do that and you'll be okay. I can't speak for her, but.
So like 30 degrees for the stuff that's closer and 20 degrees from the stuff that's farther?
Yep.
What if you're hanging like Shakespeare's on the electrics?
That's a great question. So what did I do here? I put source 4s on the electric here. I would lean towards doing 30s all around. Just because your distance is so small. In comparison, I would just, if you're trying to fill in an area, just use a 30 degree.
So
And you should be good enough.
are 20 degrees, why exactly are there 30 degrees if you could just shutter them in?
The reason why is because if you shutter something in, then you're gonna get rid of that circle beam of light, and that might be really preferable for a lighting designer. And also for gobos, if you're sticking in a gobo, you want the whole template to be seen most of the time. So you don't want to cut that off. And also, technically, there is a difference in the amount of light getting to the source. So it might, depending on the how extreme it is, you might need a different size lens. But usually it's because you want to get roughly to where you are and then edit it from there instead of having just a huge lens and then having to break it down a ton.
Cool.
But yeah, don't worry about all that crap she's telling you about photometrics. That's way past your first lighting plot. And then like if you're going to be focusing, the further back you go, you wouldn't put. Trying to figure out how to phrase this. So this light right here is focusing on, where is it focusing on? Oh, it's focusing way back here. So this light shouldn't focus right below itself. It needs to still have, it still has to be like in front of the actor. So it has to go back at least like 10 or 15 feet. So just know that if you're gonna put a light down, its focus area needs to be a decent distance away from where it's actually positioned. It's kind of, I wouldn't even say it's common sense, but that does that make sense?
Is that in the case for everything or everything but the pars?
It's just in the case of like front light. Because if you put a light down, right, and then you want this light to focus, be the front light for what is area like K, which is right here. Well, it's actually going to be top light because the angle is going to be so extreme. It's going to be like right on top of it.
Got it.
It's one of those things that's like obvious in person, but on paper, that might not be something you think about.
So, like, this is a specific question, but I have a staircase where I want a light right above the landing. Would I put a top light right there so that, like, when they turn on the light, it would be top light? Because that's, like, what an actual light would look like?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, if the effect you're going for is top light, then definitely. It's just if you're trying to just create your front light wash, to just be aware of the fact that you need some distance between it, or else it's just going to be way too extreme of an angle.
So,
But for something like that, yeah, definitely.
So
That's what you'd want to do.
talking about, would that be like, would you do all the areas and like kind of consider that a special?
I think that's kind of getting into semantics at that point. Because if you have, so a special light is just a light that fulfills a purpose that isn't really in rep, that's like specific to the show. So like for this plot right here, I have a light that is special to focus on only the door. And that's because it's out of the like standard rep of the focus areas. So at that point, you're kind of just getting into like the way you phrase it.
Right.
I wouldn't call that a special because then it gets rid of the value of it being called a special. You know. Are there any other questions at the moment? Okay. So now we've set up our back of house. Oh, we haven't really set up. So we've drawn one. And we went over the fact that you can either angle it to be right where the focus area is, or you can make them all uniform like these are. The other thing that's important is when you put down, like you've put down the fact that there's a Shakespeare here, but what hasn't been notated is the size of the lens, if it's a 30 over 20. So you have to be sure if we're going to be pointing this at area C to notate that it's a 30. In this case, I find the easiest way to do that is to literally just write down in the middle of this picture 20 or 30, depending on the size. It seems to be the easiest. Another thing you could do is you could draw a symbol, right? So in this case, it's an X on the barrel. And then in the instrument key, it'll say that it's 30, and that's how the electrician would know. but I find just writing the degree value in the middle of the fixture to be the easiest way to communicate that information. Does that make sense on communicating the lens size? All right, so we have the 30-degree lens here. Now we're going to do H. So we'll put down, we'll get our template, and we'll line this up roughly. And make it fucking. I break so much wood. I'll trace this, and then this one will be a 20, so we're at 20. And now we have those labeled there. Just to help you guys out when figuring out, so even if you know how to trace a light and the fact that it needs to point at a thing, when it comes to front light, it's really helpful to have a cool and a warm wash, so you can balance between those. And then also if the scene changes, like it can fit the needs of the show. And the way that I do this, for the most part, is I will have, I'll split down the center of the stage, and this side of the stage in this case is warm. And then this side is cool. And what I mean by this side of the stage is all of these lights are warm, and then all of these lights are cool. And the reason why that works is because, for example, this light is a warm light, and it focuses on area C, right? And then, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This light is a cool light, and it also focuses on area C. So there will be a cool light and a warm light that focuses on each area. And if you, then you might be like, well, what if I want just a neutral white tone? Well, all you have to do is take the warm and the cool and turn them both on, and then you get a toned white. And this goes into your decisions about your gels.
How do you decide about the gels?
That is an excellent question. And that is in context to your set and your costumes and what your director wants. But share a screen here. A link that I sent to you guys is the complete gel book for Lee and then Roscoe, which are the main gel makers. And the gels that I usually use as like my most base, like here's a cool and a warm, it's the least interesting looking colors in the world, but it gets the job done. For my warm is, can I put this in the chat? This might be a good starting spot. Warm, I put R3202, which is Roscoe, and then the gel number. And then for cool, I put R62. So you could look at those on your own time and get a context about roughly like a good starting spot. But it's all in context of the show, so it's kind of hard to say.
So then, when we're focusing things, we want the lights to be at the same degree of an angle. So you counted each of your lights to C. So would like F be, which lights would you use for F?
Oh, great question. So if you look here again, the way I do this is, so I have 10 of each light here, 10 of the warms and 10 of the cools, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 10 areas that I'm going to fill on this batten, right? That makes sense?
Yes.
So the way I do it is the light that's closest to center is going to be the one that focuses the furthest area. Because what happens is this light will go to E. Make a line here. This goes to E. These are piece of paper. Boom. And then this one would go to J. And so that will have a similar path of travel, right? And then this one will go to D. So I just do every other in this case. And what happens is all of these lights have a roughly similar angle that they'll be entering from. Because then in this case, this will go to A. Broken. This goes to F. This goes to B. You see how these are roughly the same angle? And they're, what you're shooting for is somewhere around 45 degrees is like the ideal, but it doesn't exactly have to be that. And then it gets more difficult on the extreme ends because, again, like shit like this. And then that's J. And so if I wanted to bring up the warm here, this will hit E. Or if I wanted to cool wash, this would hit E. And we done ABC. Oh, so for example, like this light would hit B for warm. That's all out of whack, but you can see how this angle and what would be this angle are fairly similar to one another in context of B. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Which is why figuring out your focus areas before plotting a single light will save you so much time and so much thinking and energy. I'm kind of visual, which kind of makes sense. It's a visual art. So seeing these lines helps a ton in making these decisions. And also, if you have a scene that goes from day and ends at night, and you do like it like fades into like your cool wash, the change in direction from the light is really it's subtle because it's not an extreme angle, but it's really helpful in making it more realistic. It's the difference between it being motivated and unmotivated. I don't know if you guys have talked about that. I'm not going to get into that, but it looks really nice. So does that make sense with the back of house, how we accomplish that?
Yes.
So it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be kind of sort of close.
Oh yeah, for sure. This is the thing, like these lights, the lights themselves aren't even fucking perfect. So it's not like you being perfect is going to make it all exactly the same. If a light is, one light is 45 degrees from the area thing, and you get to the other side and there's a fucking vent in your way and you have to move it 2 more feet and it's now 50 degrees off, it's going to be fine. You know, like these aren't big deals. What matters is if you have it just completely out of whack and it's not consistent in any fashion, then you get these really inconsistent shadows and the wash looks all uneven, and that's what really matters. Because I'll tell you right now, like in our venue, Peggy, without fucking doubt, always put a light right here, which is front of house, catwalk center. And there's a fucking pipe right there, okay? So it's obviously not gonna be perfect because it's gonna have to be off center. So if you guys ever have like questions while you're doing this about like, is this so off that I can't even do this? Feel free to like text me or something with a picture and I'll tell you. If you're on the right track, you know? There, in theory, should be questions when you do this past this one Zoom session, you know? That's my rant. Okay, if we move on, because this is supposed to be a walkthrough of the front of house. In this case, I use the source 4s. So if we look here, we can see source 4 right there. It's another spotlight. I just wanted to mix up the type of fixtures. And I did the same thing where some of them are straight, some of them are angled. What's important is that you just choose which way you're going to do it. It doesn't matter which one you do. And these do the same thing. So these all focus onto this area, K through N. So if we did the same logic, we could take this and you know, and the whole shebang. And this would do the same thing. So this would go to K.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Peggy said something about for each lighting space, there needs to be 3 lights to fill that space.
Mhm.
Is that true? To like, because I've seen you've been putting 2 for a lighting space.
That is just a god tier question. So she is right that it is good practice to do that. And once we get to the electrics, you'll see there is a 3rd lighting source on every spot, except for the apron. But I'll add this, if you can justify the reason, you can do anything you want. I do that in dance all the time. I'm like, fuck it, no front light. It sounds way cooler. It's because I'm a diva, but that is good practice. So the 3 sources of light that he is referring to in this case will be your front warm, then its complementary front cool, wherever that is, somewhere over here. So that's 2 sources. And then your 3rd source is going to be your top wash light. So that's what fills in everything, is that 3rd source of light. Does that make sense for how we do front light? Like those are like the basics of front light.
Yeah.
I know it kind of rambled a bit, but I wanted to give context to not just how to trace out a stencil, but actually like the theory behind how most people do front light and execute it. So if we move on, I'm going to put this to the side, this sheet of paper. We're going to look at the electrics now, which are the battens on top of the stage that have all the circuits in them. And the main fixtures I'm using for this, that really matter for this, are the source 4 pars. This little thing here. So the source 4 par is somewhere on here. Here we go. S4 par. So we'll go ahead, and if our focus area in this case is F, then I'm going to put this top light on top of F. So in this case, it's right around here. And it doesn't have to be perfect. So if you don't have an electric like dead on top of the focus area you want, tilting it like, you know, a little bit isn't going to be the end of the world at all. Like, that's fine. Because it's still, the angle is extreme enough where the angle is extreme enough where you get the same effect. So like in this case, F is actually in front of where this is hung. So this would actually get focused a couple feet in front of itself, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be exactly dead on. And so then I would put that on each focus area. I don't feel like we really need to explain that. And then these lights here, I think they're source 4s. This is the same exact thing, except this goes to focus areas O, P, and Q. So like these would both go right there in that case. So that's just more front light, because the further up on the stage you go, there's a cutoff point where you can't get any further and you have to use the electrics. Does that make sense with where to put the top light and the fact that you might have to put more front light fixtures on your electrics?
Yeah.
Okay. I put a Fresnel here. It's kind of the same idea. That's just more top light. That's actually a special that gets reflected in the instrument schedule. I'm trying to see if there's anything else to put here that's worth like showing off.
So I do have a question.
Yeah, go
When
ahead.
it comes to everything that you label, so you get the correct symbol for like the Shakespeare, and then you write 20 or 30 or whatever it is. How do you indicate that it's warm or cool, and like anything else that you need to indicate on there?
Excellent question. So what you're referring to right now then is not the fixture itself, but the fixture attributes, like the info that is specific to each fixture. Let's go through that. That was pretty much the next thing. So I want to blow this up a little bit. I want to make this bigger. I'm just going to draw a rather large, call it source forward column. So let's see, how do these look? All right, this is the really big version of what was on the template. So, just gotta think for a second. So, how do we designate if it's warm or cool? So what she's asking is, how do we show off the color value, the gel that we're adding to it, right? Usually what people do is they'll put that right where the gel physically would be. So let's say this was cool. So we're gonna use R62. So Roscoe 62 is the gel info. And I have a link to their gel catalog for you guys to refer to. So we've designated its color. This light technically doesn't have a degree, but I'll just, for the sake of conversation, we'll add a degree symbol. So it's 20 degrees. Then you kind of get into choosing how you want to designate this info. So some people might put the Gobo ID on the side. Some people might make a circle behind it and put the Gobo info there. You can just designate what you want to do. I usually would put it on the side if there was a Gobo. In this case, there isn't one though. But since we're talking about it, let's talk about circuits, channels, and dimmers and such.
One question before you go to that, 2 questions before you go to that. So would you label on that same spot what area you focus it at?
That's a great question. I usually will do that for my front light and maybe my top wash, but that's about all I usually do, mostly because you can specify the purpose of each instrument in the instrument schedule. And I don't like to have way too much stuff on the screen at once. So I'll usually do that for all of these fixtures, all my front light fixtures and such, because it's really easy to refer to. But once you start getting into the mess that is on stage, I like to keep it cleaner.
How do you indicate that?
Great question. So usually what I'll do is I'll put the circuit or address in a circle behind the fixture. So let's just say this is address 10. And then and there's usually like a little line connecting it. And then behind that, we'll put the channel info. So let's say that's 20. And then behind that, if you're putting a purpose, you get a different shape. In this case, we'll do a square. And then let's say this thing's purpose was to fill area A. You could put an A. And then now they know to focus it there.
So when you do a light plot and you have the area plot kind of thing separate, do you always have to do that area plot and turn it in so they understand where you're referencing the area?
Yep. So if you are going to have references to focus areas that you designated, your electrician needs to know what those are in some way. So that can be a separate document, or you can have them labeled on the document itself. So if this had, you know, A, B, C, fucking fuck, C, D, and E, you could not turn in a separate document if it was there. I personally like to do a completely separate one, just for the sake of cleanliness. But it does need to be designated somewhere so your electrician would know that. Does that make sense?
I
So,
another.
yep, go ahead.
Sorry. So Peggy said that like for lighting, there's like 3 or 4 line widths that you're supposed to be using on this.
Oh, sure.
A, she didn't tell us what those are, and B, do you actually use those?
So the question of is line weight important? Line weight is extremely important. Isaac bitched me out yesterday about line weight. A good rule of thumb is if it's a physical thing that exists, it needs a thicker line weight. So your thickest line weight will actually be the document edge. So what like surrounds, so like things surrounding your instrument schedule and such will be the thickest. Your second thickest will be things like walls and patents. Your third thickest will be your lighting instruments, which usually means just like your normal pencil thickness would be your pictures, because that's what you're going to be drawing a shit ton of. And then your thinnest will be the things that don't exist, such as your document info.
She also said that the settings that can be pretty light as well, or the set pieces that you're focusing on.
Yeah, so usually what I'll do is I'll make the set, like your floor plan, I'll make the walls and such thick, but I won't make them dark. So I'll usually gray them out, which is pretty easy if you're doing this on Vectorworks, and you can just hit the gray button. It's a lot easier, but I usually like to keep it decently thick, just so it's very clear where it is. But that's a personal preference too. Does that help with line weight?
Yeah, I think so.
The important thing about line weight is it needs to emphasize what's going on the page and what's important, which is why different line thicknesses matter more. Like, for example, you can tell from this piece of paper that this batten matters more than the very thin, rough outline of where the seats are, right? Because the seat position doesn't really matter that much, but the context does. What really matters is this batten. And another thing that really matters is the edge of the apron. So that's a thick line, you know? So that's the purpose of line weight, is to designate kind of importantness and create consistency throughout your document. So my recommendation for how you label these things is something like this. The degrees of the lens, if it's relevant, is on the bottom. The color is in front of it. So right at the, I guess I said the bottom, but like, yeah, right? Like where the lens would be is where you put the degree. And then the color is where you would put the color in general, so at the front. If you have a gobo, I'd put it on the side. And if you choose to use a gobo, we can talk separately about how to find your gobo ID, which is how you reference what the heck your gobo is. And then past that, I would usually do your circuit in a circle, your channel in either a triangle or this like hexagon that I got going on here, and then your purpose, if that's relevant, in a square. And fortunately, all of those shapes are right here. So it's really easy to make that look really clean and consistent. And they're sized, so they're sized in relative to the lights that you're going to trace. So that kind of helps. Does that help with the fixture like info?
Yes.
Yeah.
I do have one more question. What is
Yeah.
the triangle used for?
If you had another fixture attribute that you wanted to designate, you could use the triangle to do that.
Okay.
So
Peggy just talked about the triangle when we were doing stuff for the dandscape. Like it did something with the address or like the Lightboard app uses a triangle for something.
yeah, I really think it comes down to personal preference. As long as you designate what that info is and how it's being communicated. That might be a Peggy question on how she might do it, which is really what matters.
So like hypothetically, even though these shapes are drawn out on that stencil there, if you decided to just hand put in your own shapes but kept them consistent with what information was in each one, and you labeled that on your legend, you could do that.
Yep.
So like it's kind of just those make it easier, but you could hypothetically put a heart in it, you know,
Yeah.
whatever.
Definitely. This template is just what is most common, right? So even it just gave you 4 very common shapes that are used in drafting, and you could technically do something else. It's just not terribly recommended.
Yeah.
But it sounds fun.
I know, right?
Oh, I'm doing stars and hearts
Yeah, right.
in a beer can.
A tomato can. So what I would recommend though is for your circuit, do a circle. Kind of fits. Circuit, circle. For your channel, do the hexagon, and then if you have a purpose, it's like a focus area, which would be known as purpose, do a square, and you should be fine. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And for
Yes.
the sake of for this plot, just consider circuit and address the same thing, because in our theater, with the way it's set up, they do mean the same thing in terms of these fixtures. And that will kind of simplify this whole thing.
Is that true in most theaters?
Kinda. Most newer theaters, it's true. But if you get into older ones, a lot of them will have weird setups for like half of the electric will be circuits 1 through 10A, and then the other side will be 1 through 10B, and 1A and 1B are on the same dimmer, so they're powered by the same thing. It's kind of like having 2 outlets in your wall that are powered off of the same source. Although in the recent like 20 years, pretty much everywhere is a 1-to-1 theater, where 1 circuit equals 1 address. But it is possible to have your, like, not for this, but it is possible in different theaters for that to be not the case. Just a lot of info. I haven't had to like express this, you know. Do you guys have any questions on labeling fixture information?
No.
Awesome. And if things don't make sense, you can always reach out. You're totally welcome. But something with your fixture information is that whatever you choose, it needs to go onto a legend or a typical to just express that and express that to your master electrician about what is true. And then when it comes to how you label the degree of the lens, a 20-degree Shakespeare and a 30-degree Shakespeare are considered different instruments to this plot, right? So what you need to do in your instrument key, which will include all of your instruments, is you need to count those as 2 different instruments, even if they're technically both Shakespeares. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Oh, and May, earlier you asked about the different filters put in place for Source 4 PAR. email. My hand in here is an NS. Oh, I have a chat function. Here, I'll type it in the chat. It'll be a lot easier.
What are you typing in the chat?
So May asked on the source 4 pars, they have different filters you can put into them to change the degree of the beam. These are the labels for those 3 sizes, if you want to refer to them later.
I thought you said the source 4 pars were one size.
The fixture themselves are, but you can add an accessory known as a filter to change how that gets reflected out.
Okay.
But the fixture itself is only one size.
So what would be the purpose of labeling the source 4?
So if the source 4 has a beam, comes out, so this is comes out like this far, you can add something like a wide filter, and it'll make it so that beam comes out that far. And it's as simple as just putting it where the gel goes. Or it can go narrower, and it's like straight, which can be fun. Kind of thing. And then this is just the general layout of an instrument key. It's literally just instrument key, the stencil layout with the degree, the full name of the fixture and the degree. And you just go down the list and you include every single fixture that's there. Excuse me. That one is fairly simple. You could get more complex, but you don't have to.
Will you hold that up again so I can take a picture of it?
Is that clear enough? I can also.
Yeah, that worked for me.
All right, and also here's a live one too.
Cool. Thank you.
So then in order to figure out how to label a circuit, you just reference that original one you showed us?
Yep. So when you get to labeling the info on these, I'm sharing my screen right now, but if you go ahead and reference this circuit layout that I sent to you guys, or did you send it? Yeah, so I sent you guys this circuit layout, so you can actually reference the rough position and fill in a circuit in context to where it actually would be in the theater, which is pretty helpful.
Sweet, thank you.
Yeah. So, the reason why some of these are filled in with colors is because sometimes people will designate which ones are warm and cool. In addition to labeling it, they'll also, like with the gel ID, they'll also fill it in with like a warm color and a cool, just to give like because if like all of the cools are the same gel, you don't need to read that every time. You just need to see the fact that the fixture is blue. So I might run that by Peggy because she's grading this, but it's a pretty common practice that I've seen that's pretty helpful, especially when it comes to your larger like washes that you have a ton of the same thing.
I feel ready to do this project now.
Do you guys have any lingering questions about the plot itself and the drafting of it? Okay. So if something comes up, feel free to ask. But there is one more section to what I had in mind of telling you guys, and that is the instrument schedule, which is like the Excel sheet thing that she showed you guys. I heard that she showed you guys. Does that sound right? Yeah, a little bit. I have an example, and I also had Bree forward you not only the example that I'm about to show you, but also that Excel sheet, but blank, so you could use it as a template if you wanted. So let me pull that up. I'm sharing my screen now, if you're looking at the other one. So the purpose of an instrument schedule is essentially to explain all or more of the info, or all and more of the info that is already being expressed on the light plot itself. It's just in a spreadsheet format, which might be easier to digest for something like a console programmer. And it might also be easier to leave things like notes, like, oh, this needs to be like this, and you can't really easily put that on a plot. And the way that it's done is it's based on position. So it's based on each hanging position. So in this case, this is the back of house catwalk. So it's the first thing we looked at when it came to those Shakespeare fixtures. And the unit number refers to, if we look at this plot again, starting on stage right or house left, that is the first unit number.
Peggy showed us in class that she just labeled the numbers. Why would we do that? Or if we put it in here, like, do we have to put it on there?
So I personally don't label my unit numbers, but you can. And the way I would do that if you had to, because Peggy wanted you to, is to just label it above the gel number.
Okay.
So like if this is unit 1, 2, 3, 5.
Okay.
But the unit number restarts for every hanging position, which is the important part.
Okay.
So it's not like you would do all of them on the back of house and then continue at like 21 on the front house. Exactly. The next thing it goes over is the instrument type, which is referred to, it should be the same exact thing that your instrument key labels it as. So in this case, an Altman Shakespeare 20 degree. And then the purpose, which is the same thing as in this case, a focus area. So I just put area A, and I also put warm. You could just put A, but as a designer, I'm like, oh, that's the warm light for A. So that's what I put there. Then you would put the specific gel color. Then you put the gobo if there's a gobo. And then you would put the circuit, the universe, which you can just put 1. Universe 1 will be fine for this. In larger systems, you'll have more universes. It's a technical thing. The channel, which is the user-defined way you interact with the instrument, and the address, which will be the same as the circuit.
So how do you know what channel?
You get to decide that. So the way I do my channels is I'll take my warm wash, and that will be channel 1. So area A, warm, will be 1, and I'll go through it. And in this case, there's 17 focus areas. So warm area Q will be channel 17. And then the next one will be cool. So starting at channel 21, I pick the next highest 10. 21 will be area A, cool, and I'll go through that. So the purpose of channels is that as the end user, you can define how you want to interact with the instruments, while the address is how the computer interacts with the instruments, so the console itself. So I like to split my stuff up into really easily defined areas. If you're having trouble with that, feel free to hit me up, and I'll give you some like pointers on how to start. You should not let that be a bottleneck to starting your plot. That can be figured out after the fact. And then you could also include a notes. I forgot to add that section, but if you want to add a column that's notes, that'd be fine. And you can see I just did this for a couple areas here. Includes the color. None of them have gobos. You can see this is a special. So looks like this is between areas K and O, and it's a special. These hit the flats to the walls, so they mention the walls. Does that make sense for what an instrument schedule is supposed to do? If you label your electrics, or sorry, your hanging positions on your plot itself, so if you have like a little label next to the catwalk saying what it is, make sure however you label that it is exactly the same on your instrument schedule, because these documents aren't independent of each other. They're supposed to work with each other. So their info has to be as close as possible. They can't like contradict. I don't really have too much more to add on the instrument schedule. It kind of just makes sense if you understand the other parts.
Well, it makes sense that you do it out that way instead of just saying, here's an instrument schedule. It
Yeah.
was like you need to do one.
Yeah. And I would start with the cat blocks and just work my way to the back of the stage. Find that the easiest. And I also like, if you're just doing it on Excel like I do them, to give them a little breathing room between each area. So it's not just a huge mess. All right. That's all I had to tell you guys today. That's what I had prepared. If you have anything else you wanted context on or whatever, I'm available, or I can do it right now. Otherwise, I wish you all luck with your plots. I'll close this. I wish you all luck with your plotting and drafting, and I hope you guys have questions coming up in the next week that I can help you with.
Honestly,
Thank you.
so helpful. Thank you.
How does the, yeah, of course, you guys are my friends, so I like to help you guys out. How does this recording end up somewhere? Is this like,
I have it on my computer, so I will do this and I'll download it and I can upload it somewhere. I can either email it to you or I could make a private video on YouTube and send people the link.
okay, because an hour-long video is going to be like a huge file, won't it?
Yeah, I would either upload it to like a drive or do a YouTube video. I think
Yeah.
those would be
I'm probably just gonna upload it to YouTube because then you have to add it onto there. It's just stupid any other way, kind of.
I can bring in a flash drive and we can just put it on everyone's computer too.
Yeah.
I think the YouTube thing will work, because I'm not going to download
Okay.
an hour-long video, but
Yeah.
I'll definitely open one on YouTube. So
Yeah, no, this was really, really helpful. Thank you.
yeah, I'm so happy to. I was kind of going through this, and I'm like, yeah, I don't really know how I'd explain this, so I hope this works out. Like, especially over video.
Really, really well done.
Yeah, I feel very ready to do this assignment now.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy I was able to be of some assistance.
Or you should send this to Peggy for reference of what you should do.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I said you should send this video to Peggy for reference of how she should teach.
Well, no, I'm gonna talk to her about,
I'm kidding, but
I mean, I'm gonna let her know that a classmate is the reason why we're able to do this project.
Because it won't be obvious. Oh, it's Noah who else is.
You have a better setup for physically showing us what you were doing. Like,
Oh,
Well,
guys, you should see what I did.
like
Look at this.
shoved something together that worked, and it's just immensely better than any other system that Peggy has had set up so far.
This is what I was trying to ask her to set up too.
Yeah, right. And this is Bree's ring light. I have the actual light laying around somewhere with an iPhone holder. And my thought was you can move it side to side and it'll hold it well. I noticed it was shaky. And I
the
wasn't,
table.
yeah, so I wasn't able to fix that, but I thought it was kind of cool.
It's really good.
Yeah, that worked out.
If we were grading you, I'd give you an A+.
For sure.
Agreed. I can hear.
Yeah. Well, let me know how your projects are going. If you need any help, we can, FaceTime or whatever, and we'll figure out. We'll get you guys going for the next. It's doing like a week in a couple days.
And I'll get this uploaded so we can all reference it if we want it.
Cool. I'm gonna go make dinner.
Yeah. Thank you, Tyler.
Bye, guys.